Hi everyone, welcome back to the University of Guelph Arboretum. My name is Michelle and I'm the Summer Naturalist here at the Arboretum. And today I'm in Victoria Woods checking out some woody plants. Woody plants are plants whose growth persists year-round. This is in contrast to herbaceous plants, for example flowers, whose growth will die back in the colder temperatures. So if we can think of a flower, they'll grow in the spring and summer, but come the cold temperatures in fall and winter, their growth will die back to just the roots. Woody plants, on the other hand, have that protective layer of bark, and so their growth is protected from the cold temperatures. But oftentimes when people think of woody plants, we often just think of trees. But there are other types of woody plants, like shrubs and vines. And that's exactly what today's video is gonna be all about. And filming this video in Victoria Woods is also pretty cool because Victoria Woods is an old growth forest. So that means this is a forest that's never been clear cut. And it means that it's filled with a lot of mature trees that can grow really tall, but it's also filled with a lot of understory growth. So let's take a closer look at a shrub nearby to try to distinguish what makes shrubs and trees different. So here I have a dogwood shrub, and if we take a closer look at the ground, we can learn what is one of the things that makes shrubs different from trees. So you can see here there are multiple stems growing out of the ground, and this is what makes up this dogwood. But if we look at a tree like this individual here, you'll notice that it's just one trunk that's growing out of the ground. And so this is one thing that you can often use to distinguish shrubs from trees, is the fact that most of the times you'll see shrubs having multiple stems coming out of the ground, and most of the times in the case of trees you'll only see one trunk. There's another thing that you can use to differentiate the two, and that's height. Oftentimes shrubs will grow to be a lot shorter than trees. This is not always the best feature to use because some shrubs can grow to be really tall. But in general, if you come across a woody plant with multiple stems coming out of the ground and it's shorter than you would expect a tree to grow, there's a good chance you're looking at a shrub. Not only do shrubs and trees visually look similar, but they also have a lot of different attributes that are also similar. So both trees and shrubs can be deciduous. This means that they'll lose their leaves in the winter. And both can be evergreen, meaning that some trees and shrubs will hold on to their leaves year-round. They can also both grow in a variety of different habitats, like forest and open fields and close to bodies of water like rivers and streams. But within the habitats they grow, trees and shrubs will occupy different roles. So we can think of this forest as having briefly three different layers. There's the top of the forest, which is the canopy, and this is where tall, mature trees live. This is the tallest part of the forest. And below the canopy, there's the understory, and this is where other woody plants like shrubs and vines grow. This is also the place where herbaceous plants like flowers will grow, and immature trees that aren't quite old and tall enough to live up in the canopy will grow. Below the understory, there is the ground, and it's often covered with a lot of organic matter. And you can notice something unique about the ground of old growth forests. So let's take a quick look at the ground here. So we can of course see a lot of organic matter like the dead leaves and the logs, but something that makes old growth forests unique is the fact that there are mounds and pits on the forest floor. So here you can see there is a divot in the ground and there's a mound over here. And one of the reasons why old growth forests have these mounds and pits is because since they've never been clear cut, when a tree naturally dies and decomposes in a given space, it creates a little bit of a mound there. And so this is one thing, really one way you can tell if you're an old growth forest. The ground shouldn't be flat. Instead, you'll see mounds and pits all along the forest floor. So within this forest, the trees and the shrubs are functioning in different ways. The trees are growing up tall and they are providing the forest with structure, and of course they're also shading the understory. And the understory growth, which is comprised of the different woody plants and herbaceous plants, is just as important as the tree growth. So shrubs, for example, can attract different animals to a forest, and that's through the different types of food they might produce. And it's also through the habitat and shelter they can provide different animals. Some animals might prefer to nest or live in a shrub rather than up tall in a tree. And so this is the way that different shrubs and different woody plants can help attract different animals. What's really interesting is also the way that shrubs and understory growth can actually dissuade some animals from hanging around certain types of forest. If we can think of a hawk, for example, this is a bird of prey that tends to like to hunt in open environments. But if a forest has a lot of understory growth, that means the forest isn't very open. And this isn't very good hunting grounds for a hawk. And that might mean that forests with a lot of understory growth might have fewer hawks hanging around. So not only can the understory of a forest attract different animals, but it can also dissuade certain animals from hanging around. The other woody plant that this video is about is vines. So there's a few vines behind me. And something that sets vines apart from other woody plants is that they are oftentimes faster growing. And this has to do with the fact that they don't have to devote quite as much energy towards growing a thicker stem or trunk like shrubs and trees have to. Instead, vines will often grow on structures like buildings or benches and on other trees. So let's take a closer look at some of the vines behind me. If we look closer to the ground, there is a vine growing here. So this is a Riverbank Grape. And if we take a look at its stem, we'll notice that it is woody, so this is still a woody plant, but it's a lot thinner than that of a tree or a shrub. And one of the things that often defines vines is the fact that many of them will climb onto structures and trees. But if there isn't anything to climb onto, a lot of the times many vines will do fine just growing close to the ground. If some vines can do fine growing closer to the ground, you may wonder, why do they even bother growing onto structures and trees at all? And it has to do with a little thing called competition. In general, all plants are in constant competition with each other to gain better access to a really important resource: sunlight. In the case of trees, trees tend to grow taller in a forest because they're competing with each other to gain access to sunlight. So by growing taller, they can be up high where there's more sunlight available. And in the case of vines, what they'll do is to gain better access to sunlight, especially in a forest where the canopy can often shade the understory, is they'll just grow onto trees that have already put a lot of work and energy to growing tall. In this way, vines can gain access to more sunlight. And in doing so, sometimes vines can actually change the structure of a forest. So if there's too many vines growing on a particular tree, the weight of that vine can actually snap some of its branches. And that's of course no good for the tree itself because it's losing some of the branches that it's already grown. And it's not ideal for the vine either because now it's back on the bottom of the forest, exactly where it was trying to not be. But when that happens, when vines break branches of a tree, it can actually create openings in that forest where more sunlight can reach the understory of that forest. So oftentimes in old growth forest, because there's already been so many mature trees that have grown, there's very limited access to sunlight below the canopy. But when vines, this isn't on purpose, but when vines happen to break branches of trees, It opens up that forest a little bit and allows more sunlight to peek into the understory of that forest. And this can allow other woody plants like shrubs and vines to grow, but it can also help immature trees grow taller because now they have more access to sunlight. And this isn't the only function that vines play in a given habitat. Just like shrubs and trees, they can also provide excellent habitat and food for different animals that live in a forest. So they're equally important as shrubs and trees. I hope you guys enjoyed learning a little bit about shrubs and vines. It really is awesome to think about the huge diversity of plants that live and make up a forest. I hope next time you go on a walk, you'll take a moment to appreciate not only how diverse forests are and the animals that live in it, but also in the plants that make it up. I hope you'll join me next week for another Wednesday video. I'll see you then.